The gravity on the mining moon of Tartarus 6 was heavy, a dense and oppressive force that made every movement feel like wading through waist-deep water. Kai Voss wiped a smear of grease from his forehead, leaving a dark streak against his pale, stubbled skin. The air recyclers on his ship, a battered heavy hauler-class vessel named the Rusty Anvil, were struggling to filter out the sulfurous stench of the moon's atmosphere. Kai adjusted the hydro-spanner in his grip, torquing a rusted bolt on the carcass of a downed Imperial frigate. This was his life now. 5 years ago, he had been a lieutenant in the Earth Coalition forces, commanding a strike team on the front lines of the expansion wars. Now, he was a scavenger, picking the bones of the empire he had once fought to expand. He preferred the silence of the scrapyard to the noise of the Senate. The credits were terrible, barely enough to keep the anvil flying, but the solitude was priceless. He successfully pried the power coupling loose, the heavy metal component falling into his waiting hand with a satisfying clank. 100 credits. Maybe 150 if the fence at the outpost was feeling generous. A sharp crack echoed across the canyon, shattering the silence. Kai froze, his combat instincts flaring to life before his conscious mind even registered the sound. It was not the groan of settling metal or the pop of a thermal vent. It was the distinct, high-pitched snap of a plasma discharge. He dropped into a crouch behind the frigate's landing strut, his eyes scanning the ridge of the crater. Another shot rang out, followed by the unmistakable roar of an explosion. Dust plumed into the thin atmosphere a quarter of a mile away. Someone was running. Kai narrowed his eyes. Scavengers did not run. They skulked, and scavengers certainly did not use military-grade plasma weaponry. He considered retreating into the anvil and sealing the ramp, but curiosity, that fatal flaw of his species, kept him rooted for a second too long. A figure crested the ridge, silhouetted against the bruised purple sky. They were moving with desperate, chaotic speed, sliding down the scree slope in a cloud of dust and rocks. Even from this distance, Kai could see the glint of armor, battered and scorched, reflecting the dim light of the twin moons. Behind the runner, 3 hoverskiffs screamed over the lip of the crater, their mounted cannons chewing up the ground. Kai swore under his breath. He grabbed the power coupling and sprinted toward the open cargo bay of the anvil. He punched the panel to close the ramp, the hydraulics hissing in protest, but he was not fast enough. The runner hit the bottom of the slope and launched themselves with impossible force, clearing the gap between the ground and the rising ramp. They crashed into the cargo bay, rolling across the metal decking in a tangle of limbs and debris. Kai spun around, his hand dropping to the heavy projectile pistol holstered at his hip. The intruders scrambled to their feet. It was a woman, though she looked more like a creature born of war and blood. Her armor was an intricate weave of gold and obsidian alloy, clearly Valari design, but it was rented with deep gouges and burn marks. Her helmet was gone, revealing a face that was terrifyingly beautiful, sharp-angled and pale, framed by chaotic white hair that hung in matted clumps. She was bleeding from a wound in her side, a dark, violet-hued liquid soaking the torn bodysuit beneath her plating. Her eyes were wide, wild, and glowing with a faint bioluminescent predatory light. She looked feral, a cornered animal ready to tear out the throat of anything that moved. Before Kai could draw his weapon, she moved. She crossed the 10 feet between them in a blur, slamming him back against the bulkhead. The impact knocked the wind out of him. A blade made of humming violet energy materialized from a wrist gauntlet, the tip hovering an inch from his jugular. The heat of it singed the collar of his flight jacket. "You will take me off this rock," she hissed. Her voice was a ragged growl, layered with pain and an accent that sounded like crushing glass. "Take me to the nearest jump gate. Now." Kai looked down at the plasma blade, then up at her eyes. He did not flinch. He had stared down warlords and generals. A wounded fugitive was just another Tuesday. "I am not a taxi service," he said, his voice flat and unimpressed. "And you are bleeding on my deck plates." She pressed the blade closer, the hum intensifying. "Do not test me, human. I will gut you and fly this ship myself if I must." "You would crash it before you cleared the atmosphere," Kai countered. "The anvil has a manual stick. You need 2 hands to fly it, and you are currently using one to hold your guts in." She bared her teeth, revealing canines that were slightly too sharp for a human. The feral intensity in her gaze wavered for a fraction of a second as a spasm of pain racked her body. But her grip on the blade did not loosen. Outside, the whine of the hover skiffs grew louder. The heavy thrum of their engines vibrated through the hull of the ship. Kai glanced past her. Through the narrowing gap of the closing ramp, through the haze, he saw the markings on the side of the lead skiff, a stylized skull inside a sunburst. The Red Sash Guild, bounty hunters. And not the cheap kind. These were professionals who charged 5,000 credits just to put their boots on in the morning. If the guild was here, this woman was worth a fortune. Or she was a walking death sentence. "Open the ramp," Kai said suddenly. She blinked, confusion warring with her aggression. "What?" "If they see the ramp closing, they will blast the hydraulics and we will never leave." Kai shoved her arm aside, ignoring the deadly blade, and moved toward the cockpit ladder. "If you want to live, get strapped in." "I am lifting off." He did not wait for her response. He climbed the ladder 2 rungs at a time, vaulting into the pilot's seat. His fingers flew across the dashboard, flipping toggles and priming the fusion drive. The anvil shuddered as the engines roared to life, spitting blue fire onto the landing pad. On the view screen, he saw the 3 skiffs circling his position. They were hailing him, demanding he power down by the authority of the Imperial peacekeepers. Kai ignored them. He diverted all auxiliary power to the rear shields and slammed the throttle forward. The anvil lurched upward, heavy and ungraceful, like a brick thrown by a giant. Laser fire splashed against the rear shields, rocking the ship violently. Alarms blared in the cockpit, flashing crimson warnings about shield integrity and hull stress. "Hold on!" Kai shouted over the comms. He yanked the stick to the right, throwing the ship into a sickening roll to avoid a missile lock. The artificial gravity compensators whined, struggling to keep up. Below them, the mining moon fell away, a gray and brown marble shrinking in the distance. Kai punched the coordinates for the hyperspace lane, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The stars outside the viewport stretched into long lines of light, and with a sudden, jarring lurch, the ship jumped. The silence of hyperspace was sudden and absolute. The roar of the engines faded to a dull, rhythmic thrum. Kai exhaled a long breath, leaning back in his chair. He ran a hand through his short, dark hair. He had just engaged in a firefight with the Red Sash Guild and violated 6 airspace treaties. He spun the chair around and stood up. It was time to find out exactly what kind of trouble he had just invited on board. He found her in the mess hall, which was really just a small table bolted to the floor near the cargo bay. She had found the emergency medical kit and was attempting to cauterize the wound in her side with a sterile strip. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Kai leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms over his chest. He watched her for a moment. The adrenaline had faded, leaving her looking smaller, though no less dangerous. "You are Princess Zirixa," he said. It was not a question. She froze, the sterile strip hovering over her torn skin. Slowly, she turned her head to look at him. Her eyes had dimmed from their combat-level luminescence to a piercing, icy blue. "You know me. I checked the bounty feeds once we cleared the atmosphere," Kai said, walking over to the kitchenette to pour himself a cup of stale calf. High treason, assassination of a royal advisor, conspiracy to incite civil war. The payout is 50 million credits. He took a sip of the bitter liquid, watching her over the rim of the mug. That is enough money to buy a moon, or a fleet of ships. Syrixa straightened up, wincing as the movement pulled at her injury. She abandoned the medical kit and stood to her full height. Even wounded, she possessed a regal, terrifying posture. She looked at him with pure disdain, as if he were a smudge of dirt on her boot. "And yet, you did not sell me to the hunters," she said, her voice cold and imperious. "Why? Are you waiting for a better offer?" Kai snorted. "I don't like the guild, and I don't like people shooting at my ship. Don't read too much into it, Your Highness." "Don't call me that," she snapped. "I am no princess of yours, human. I am a warrior of the Valari Dominion. You will address me as commander." "You are a fugitive on a garbage scow," Kai corrected her, setting his mug down. "And unless you want to bleed out on my floor, you are going to let me finish sealing that wound. You are doing it wrong." He stepped forward, reaching for the medical scanner. She slapped his hand away with shocking speed. "Do not touch me. I do not require the assistance of a mechanic." Kai pulled his hand back, his expression hardening. He was tired, he was broke, and he had just saved her life. His patience was wearing thin. "Fine," he said, stepping back. "Bleed then. But if you stain the upholstery, I am adding a cleaning fee to your bill." He turned to walk back to the cockpit. "Where are we going?" she demanded, her tone shifting from defensive to commanding. "To a station I know," Kai said over his shoulder. "Neutral territory. I need to refuel and figure out how to dump you without getting my head blown off." "No," she ordered. "You will take me to the Antares sector. I have contacts there. The rebellion—" Kai stopped and turned around slowly. "The rebellion? You think I am going to fly a wanted war criminal into the heart of a war zone? Not a chance. We are going to Station 4. You get off there, and I go back to my life." "That is not acceptable," Syrixa declared. She strode toward him, ignoring her injury. "You will follow my orders. I am commandeering this vessel." Kai laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You are commandeering nothing. This is my ship, my rules." She narrowed her eyes. "We shall see." She pushed past him, heading for the cockpit. Kai grabbed her arm to stop her. "Hey, I said no." The moment his fingers closed around her bicep, she exploded into motion. She twisted out of his grip, using his own momentum to swing around behind him. She kicked the back of his knee, forcing him to stumble, then shoved him hard against the corridor wall. She was fast, incredibly fast, but Kai had been a soldier before he was a scavenger. He recovered quickly, blocking her next strike and grappling with her. They struggled in the narrow hallway, a chaotic mess of limbs and heavy breathing. She was strong, far stronger than a human woman of her size should be. Her muscles dense and powerful. She managed to land a solid punch to his jaw that made his vision swim. But Kai used his weight to pin her arms to her sides. He shoved her backward, forcing her into his sleeping quarters, which lay just off the main corridor. He threw her onto the narrow bunk and slammed his hand onto the door control panel. The blast door slid shut with a heavy thud, locking instantly. "Let me out," she screamed, pounding on the metal. "You insolent cur, I will have your head for this." Kai rubbed his jaw, tasting blood. He keyed the locking mechanism to biometric-only access. "Stay in there and cool off, princess. I have a ship to fly." He walked back to the cockpit, his heart pounding. She was in trouble, the kind of trouble that got entire solar systems burned to ash. He sat in the pilot's seat, staring at the stars. He should turn around. He should call the guild and hand her over. 50 million credits. He could retire. He could buy a private island on Earth and never look at a scrap heap again. But he knew he wouldn't. He had seen the desperation in her eyes. He had seen the fear she was trying so hard to mask with rage. Kai Voss had done many things he regretted in the war, but he had never sold out a desperate soul for money. He set the autopilot for Station 4 and leaned back, closing his eyes. An hour later, a warning chime woke him from a light doze. Hull breach detected in crew quarters. The computer's synthetic voice announced, "Internal sensors offline." Kai's eyes snapped open. Hull breach. That was impossible. The shields were up. He pulled up the internal surveillance feed on his console. The screen for his quarters was static. "Damn it," he muttered, unbuckling his harness. He grabbed his pistol and marched down the corridor. When he reached the door to his quarters, the control panel was dead. Sparks were showering from the wiring. The metal of the door itself looked melted, not by heat, but by something corrosive. The door hissed and slid open halfway, then jammed. Kai squeezed through the gap, weapon raised. The room was empty. The ventilation grate in the ceiling had been torn open. The metal bent back like wet cardboard. She was in the vents. He spun around, realizing instantly where she was going. The engineering deck. The manual override for the navigation computer was located directly above the reactor core. Kai sprinted toward the ladder at the end of the hall. He slid down the rails, landing on the engineering deck with a heavy thud. Zirixa was there. She was standing at the auxiliary console, her hands moving rapidly across the interface. She had bypassed the security lockouts. The navigation chart on the main screen was shifting, the destination changing from Station 4 to the Antares sector. "Step away from the console," Kai ordered, aiming the pistol at her center mass. She did not turn around. "You are slow, human. I have already locked in the new coordinates. We jumped in 2 minutes." Kai glanced at her hands. Her fingertips were glowing with a strange, shifting light. Tiny metallic tendrils were extending from her skin, interfacing directly with the ship's computer ports. Biotech. It was forbidden in the Coalition, but the Valari had been experimenting with it for centuries. She had hacked his door, and now his ship, using her own body. I said step away. Kai didn't want to shoot her, but he couldn't let her hijack his life. Zirixa turned slowly. She looked exhausted, the use of the biotech clearly draining her reserves. Her skin was paler, the veins around her eyes dark and pronounced. But her defiance was untouched. "Or what?" she sneered. "You will shoot an unarmed woman?" "You are hardly unarmed," Kai said, gesturing to her glowing fingers. "You are a walking weapon." He holstered the pistol. It was a calculated risk. He needed to regain control, but not through violence. Violence was her language, and she spoke it better than he did. He needed to change the conversation. He walked toward her, deliberately slow. "Cancel the jump. Zirixa, you are going to get us killed. The Antares sector is a war zone. We won't last 5 minutes." "I do not fear death," she said, raising her chin. "I fear failure. I must reach my people." "You don't have any people left," Kai shouted, closing the distance. "Look at the news feeds. Your family has declared you a traitor. The Dominion fleet is hunting you. If you go back there now, you are just walking into an execution." She flinched as if he had struck her. The glow in her fingers faded, retracting back into her skin. The pain on her face was raw and unguarded for a fleeting second before the mask of fury slammed back into place. "You know nothing of my world," she spat. "You are a scavenger, a bottom feeder. You think small because you are small." She lunged at him. It wasn't a tactical strike this time. It was emotional, wild and desperate. She slammed into him, driving him back against the bulkhead of the engine room. Her hands bunched in the collar of his jacket, slamming him against the metal hard enough to rattle his teeth. She pinned him there, her face inches from his. He could feel the heat radiating from her, smell the metallic tang of her blood and the ozone scent of her anger. Her eyes were blazing again, that predatory violet light swirling in her irises. "You cannot control me," she snarled, her voice echoing in the small chamber. She was trembling, her entire body vibrating with the force of her denial. "I am Zirixa of House Valari. I am the storm that breaks the mountain. I can't be tamed by a peasant with a rusted ship." She breathed heavily, her chest heaving against his. She was waiting for him to fight back. She was waiting for him to try to overpower her, to prove her right that the universe was nothing but a struggle for dominance. Kai didn't move. He did not fight her grip. He didn't reach for his weapon, he just looked at her. He saw the terrified girl hiding beneath the armor of the warlord. He saw the loneliness of someone who had never been allowed to be anything other than a symbol of power. Slowly, the corner of his mouth twitched up into a smirk. It wasn't mocking. It was almost sad. "Good," he said softly. Zirixa blinked, her grip faltering slightly. "What?" I said. "Good," Kai repeated, his voice calm and steady in the face of her rage. "I am not here to tame you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and significant. Zirixa stared at him. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Confusion washed over her features, replacing the anger. She had expected a fight. She had expected him to assert authority, to try to break her will as her father and the court had tried to do for her entire life. She had braced herself for conquest. She had no defense against acceptance. She searched his eyes, looking for the lie, looking for the trap. She found only a tired honesty. Kai gently reached up and took her wrists. He didn't force them away. He just held them, his thumbs brushing over the pulse points where her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her skin. "I don't want a pet, Zirixa, and I don't want a prisoner. I just want to survive the day. If you want to go to Antares, we can talk about it. But we do it smart. We don't do it by suicide run." She looked down at his hands holding hers. The contact was warm, rough, and completely lacking in aggression. Slowly, the tension drained out of her shoulders. The glowing light in her eyes faded back to a deep, uncertain blue. She released his jacket, stepping back a half step. She looked like she had lost her balance, though she was standing perfectly still. She started, her voice losing its imperious edge. "I do not understand you." "You don't have to," Kai said, letting go of her wrists. "Just don't wreck my ship." He turned back to the navigation console and manually canceled the jump to Antares. He set a new course, a compromise vector that would take them to the edge of the sector, away from the main trade routes but close enough to monitor the Dominion channels. "Get some rest," he said, not looking at her. "The med bay is down the hall to the left. Actual medical gel, not just tape. Use it." He heard her shift behind him, the sound of her boots scuffing on the deck. She hesitated for a long moment, as if weighing whether to stab him in the back or obey. Finally, without a word, she turned and walked away. Kai let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He slumped against the console, staring at the readouts. His hands were shaking slightly. That had been close. Too close. He was about to head back to the cockpit when the proximity alarm screamed through the ship. It was a harsh, dissonant klaxon that signaled immediate danger. Kai slammed his hand onto the comms panel. "Report!" Sensors detecting multiple hyperspace signatures emerging in the sector. The computer replied, "Identification. Valari Dominion Interceptor class." Kai swore loudly. He brought up the tactical display. 5 ships had just dropped out of warp less than 10,000 kilometers off his port bow. They were sleek, silver predators, bristling with weaponry. They weren't the clunky, modified skiffs of the bounty hunters. These were military vessels. Royal Guard, and they were hailing him. Unidentified freighter. A voice boomed over the open channel, cold and digitized. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. You are harboring a fugitive of the crown. Kai stared at the screen. They had found them. How? They had been in hyperspace. There was no way to track a ship in the jump unless someone had known exactly where they were going before they even left the ground. He looked down the hallway where Sirixa had disappeared. We were tipped off, he whispered to himself. He punched the intercom button. Princess, get up here, we have company. As the Anvil's engines whined in protest, spooling up for a desperate run, Kai realized one thing with crystal clarity. He hadn't just picked up a stray, he had picked up a war. The view screen of the rusty Anvil was a chaotic kaleidoscope of warning lights and streaking stars. The 5 Valari interceptors were closing the distance with terrifying efficiency, their laser cannons tearing chunks out of the freighter's rear deflector shields. The ship shuddered violently, the metal groaning under the thermal stress of the assault. Kai Voss fought the flight yoke with white-knuckled desperation. Sweat stung his eyes, but he did not have a spare hand to wipe it away. He was pushing the old engines 20% past their red line, but the sleek military vessels were gaining. They were predators of the void, and his ship was nothing more than a wounded bison. Sirixa stood behind the pilot's chair, gripping the headrest to keep her balance as the artificial gravity fluctuated. She was not looking at the pursuing ships. Her eyes were locked on the long-range sensor array, her gaze intense and calculating. They are hurting us, she stated, her voice cutting through the roar of the engines and the wail of the alarms. They are pushing us toward the hyperspace lane vector to force a jump trap. I know what they are doing, Kai gritted out, throwing the ship into a corkscrew roll that spilled his lukewarm coffee across the dashboard. I just can't stop them. I can't outrun them, and I certainly can't outgun them. Do not outrun them, Sirixa commanded, pointing a slender pale finger at a dense cluster of static on the navigation map. Outmaneuver them. There. Sector 7 Gimel. An asteroid field. Kai glanced at the readout and laughed. A sharp, frantic sound. That is not an asteroid field, Princess. That is the gravesite. It is a planetary graveyard. The magnetic interference alone will fry my sensors. Flying in there is suicide. It is cover, she countered, her tone brooking no argument. Their targeting computers rely on thermal locking. The magnetic radiation of the field will blind them. We can lose them in the debris, or we can smash into a rock the size of Manhattan. Kai, listen to me. She leaned forward, her face close to his ear. The scent of ozone and alien wildflowers assaulted his senses. The Valari interceptors are built for speed and open space. They have weak lateral thrusters. They cannot maneuver in tight quarters. Your ship is a brick. It is slow, but it is durable. Another blast rocked the ship, knocking the shield integrity down to 12%. A shower of sparks rained down from the overhead console. Fine, Kai shouted, slamming the throttle forward. Then into the grinder we go. He yanked the stick hard to the left, breaking away from the escape vector the Valari were trying to force. The Anvil groaned in protest as the inertial dampeners struggled to compensate for the sudden G-force. The 5 interceptors overshot them for a split second before peeling off in a graceful, deadly arc to follow. The asteroid field loomed ahead, a swirling, chaotic ocean of tumbling rock and ice. It was dense, a wall of destruction that had claimed 1,000 careless pilots. Kai plunged the ship into the maelstrom. The silence of the void was replaced by the terrifying sound of debris hammering against the hull. It sounded like they were being pelted with gravel inside a tin can. Kai flew on instinct, dodging tumbling monoliths of granite and weaving through clouds of ice crystals. Behind them, The lead interceptor tried to follow. It juked left to avoid a spinning rock, but its wing clipped a smaller asteroid. The shields flared and failed. The ship spun out of control, slamming into a larger debris chunk in a silent, brilliant blossom of orange fire. "One down," Kai muttered, his eyes wide and unblinking. "Incoming at 3 o'clock, Zirixa shouted. Kai didn't think. He reacted. He killed the engines, flipping the ship end over end using the maneuvering thrusters, drifting backward between two colliding asteroids. Laser fire streaked through the space where they had been a second before. Zirixa's hands flew across the co-pilot's station. She wasn't just shouting orders, she was rerouting power, balancing the shields and managing the heat signatures. She anticipated the drift of the asteroids before the computer did. She was a natural tactician, reading the chaos of the battlefield like sheet music. For 10 minutes, they were a perfect team, united by the desperate need to survive. Kai provided the raw piloting skill, the human intuition that defied logic, while Zirixa provided the cold, hard calculation of a warrior born. They cleared the densest part of the field, emerging into the shadow of a rogue planet that drifted in the center of the debris cloud. It was a dark, shrouded world, unlisted on any star chart. "We made it," Kai breathed, his chest heaving. A warning light flashed crimson on the dashboard. "Coolant leaked," Zirixa noted, her voice calm. "The main manifold has ruptured." The engine temperature spiked. The hum of the fusion drive turned into a sickening grind. "Brace for impact," Kai yelled. The engines died. The heavy gravity of the rogue planet reached out and grabbed the metal hulk of the ship. They fell toward the clouded surface, not in a glide, but in a controlled plummet. Kai fought the controls all the way down, wrestling the heavy hauler through the turbulent atmosphere. Clouds whipped past the viewport. The ground rushed up to meet them, a landscape of jagged peaks and deep, purple valleys. He fired the emergency landing thrusters at the last second. The rusty anvil slammed into the ground, skidding across a plain of dark obsidian gravel. Metal screamed, gear sheared off, and the ship spun 180 degrees before coming to a shuddering, groaning halt. Silence descended, heavy and absolute. Kai slumped in his harness, staring at the ceiling. Is everyone still in one piece? Zirixa unbuckled her restraints with steady hands. "I am functional. Your landing, however, lacked grace." Kai turned his head to look at her. "We are alive. That is graceful enough." They assessed the damage. It was bad, but not fatal. The hull was intact, but the main drive was offline, and the starboard landing strut was snapped. They would need hours, maybe a full day, to effect repairs. They exited the ship to check the external damage. The air on the planet was breathable but thin, carrying a metallic taste. The sky was a swirling bruise of violet and gray. They had crashed in a valley surrounded by towering cliffs of black stone. But as Kai looked closer, he realized the cliffs were not natural. They were carved. Huge, monolithic structures rose from the mist, ancient and weathered by eons of neglect. Spires twisted into the sky like petrified smoke. Arches spanned vast chasms covered in faint, glowing geometric carvings. "This isn't just a rock," Kai said, unholstering his scanner, "and these are ruins, the pre-Republic, or maybe even pre-Valari." Zirixa walked past him, her eyes fixed on a massive, crumbling archway. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and brushed her fingers against the cold stone. The faint etchings flared with a dim, pulsing light at her touch. "No," she whispered, "not Pre-Valari, Proto-Valari." She turned to Kai, her expression a mixture of awe and fear. "This place, I have seen it in the archives of the High Temple. This is the shrine of the first breath. It is sacred ground to my mother's bloodline." Kai frowned, holstering the scanner. "Your mother's bloodline? I thought you were royalty. Doesn't that make all Valari territory your bloodline? The Valari are a coalition of houses, she explained, her voice distant. My father is from the Iron House, conquerors. My mother. She was of the Whisper House, seers, healers. They were wiped out centuries ago, or so I was told. She looked around the desolate valley. Why would the archives say it was destroyed if it is still here? Kai didn't like the look in her eyes. It was too vulnerable. He focused on the practical. Look, sacred or not, it is a good place to hide. The minerals in these rocks are scrambling the sensor signals. The fleet won't be able to scan us down here. We are safe for tonight. They set up a camp in the shelter of the massive archway, unwilling to sleep inside the tilted, claustrophobic ship while the life support cyclers rebooted. Kai started a fire using chemical blocks from the survival kit. The orange flames cast dancing shadows against the ancient obsidian walls. Night fell quickly and the temperature plummeted. Kai sat by the fire, grimacing as he tried to adjust the bandage on his shoulder. A piece of shrapnel from the console explosion had caught him during the chase. It was a shallow cut, but it burned like fire, and his arm was stiffening up. Jirixa sat on the opposite side of the fire, cleaning her plasma blade with a piece of cloth. She watched him struggle for a moment before sighing. You are going to get an infection, she said. Human immune systems are pathetically weak. Kai grunted, pulling the bandage tight with his teeth. I will be fine. I have had worse. She stood up and walked around the fire. She dropped to her knees beside him, her movements fluid and predatory. Without asking, she reached out and peeled his hand away from the wound. Let me see. I said I am fine, Kai protested, trying to pull away. Stop being stubborn, she commanded softly. She inspected the wound. The skin was angry and red. She looked at his face, her eyes searching for him. I can fix this, but you have to trust me. Kai looked at her. Trust was a commodity he was short on. What are you going to do? Cauterize it? No. The Valari of the Iron House burn. The Whisper House. We mend. She unclasped the gauntlets of her armor, setting them on the ground. Then she began to unbuckle the top of her bodysuit. Kai's eyes widened. Whoa, hold on. What are you doing? She ignored him, pulling the heavy fabric down to expose her shoulders and upper chest. Her skin was pale, marked with faint, bioluminescent patterns that swirled like constellations. Skin-to-skin contact is required, she stated matter-of-factly. My neurobiology can interface with yours, but I need a direct pathway. The palms of my hands and the skin of my chest have the highest concentration of nerve endings. She moved closer, straddling his lap. Kai froze. He held his breath as she settled her weight against him. It was an intimate position, undeniably so. Her legs were locked around his waist, her face inches from his. He could feel the heat radiating from her body. She took his injured arm and placed it against her bare shoulder. Then she placed her palms on his chest, directly over his heart. Close your eyes, she whispered, and do not fight the connection. Kai closed his eyes. At first, there was nothing but the cool touch of her skin. Then a sensation like warm water began to flow through him. It started at the point of contact and spread outward, rushing through his veins. It wasn't just physical warmth. It was a mental presence. He could feel her. He felt her exhaustion, her fear, and beneath it all, a fierce, burning will to survive. He felt the pain in his shoulder spike, sharp and hot, and then suddenly vanish, replaced by a soothing numbness. He gasped, his eyes flying open. Shirixa's eyes were closed, her head thrown back slightly. The bioluminescent markings on her skin were glowing brightly now, pulsing in time with his own heartbeat. She was drawing the pain out of him, metabolizing the trauma through her own system. It was the most intimate thing Kai had ever experienced. It was deeper than sex. It was a mingling of souls. He watched her face in the firelight. She looked beautiful, not in the terrifying, warlike way she usually did, but in a soft, ethereal way. The glowing faded. Zirixa slumped forward, resting her forehead against his uninjured shoulder. Her breathing was ragged. "It is done," she murmured. Kai wrapped his arms around her waist to steady her. He could feel the rapid beat of her heart against his chest. They stayed like that for a long moment. The silence of the dead planet heavy around them. "Why are you really running, Zirixa?" he asked quietly. "And don't tell me it is about treason. You don't betray your people unless they betray you first." She didn't pull away. She stayed pressed against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "They were going to sell me," she said, her voice muffled against his jacket. "Sell you? A mating ceremony. To the High Archon of the Krell Syndicate. He is a monster, a warlord who has butchered entire systems. But he has a fleet that my father needs to crush the rebellion on the Outer Rim." She lifted her head, looking him in the eye. "They drugged me. They put me in the ceremonial robes. They were going to hand me over like a piece of livestock to solidify an alliance. I didn't just run. Kai, I killed the guards. I broke the arm of the High Priest. I chose to be a traitor rather than a broodmare." Kai looked at her, seeing the raw pain and the incredible strength it took to admit that vulnerability. "You are not livestock," he said firmly. "And you are not a traitor. You are a survivor." The air between them shifted. The tension that had been simmering since she crashed into his cargo bay boiled over. It wasn't combat tension anymore. Zirixa looked at his lips. Her gaze was hungry, searching. She shifted her weight, her hips pressing against his. Kai's breath hitched. He raised a hand, cupping her jaw. Her skin was incredibly soft. "Zirixa," he whispered. The sound of her name, spoken with such tenderness, seemed to shatter the spell. She froze. Her eyes widened, panic flaring in the violet depths. She realized where she was, what she was doing. She was letting a human, a man she barely knew, see the parts of her she kept hidden behind armor and rage. She scrambled backward, pushing herself off his lap. She stumbled, nearly falling into the fire before regaining her balance. I must check the perimeter," she stammered, pulling her bodysuit back up to cover her glowing skin. "Zirixa, wait!" Kai started, reaching out. "Do not!" she snapped, backing away into the darkness. "Just leave me be." She vanished into the shadows of the ruins. Kai sat by the fire. His hand still reached out, grasping at empty air. He ran his hand through his hair, cursing silently. He had pushed too hard, too fast. Or maybe he hadn't pushed enough. He looked at his shoulder. The wound was gone, leaving only faint, silvery scar tissue. He let her go. He knew she needed space, but he also knew she wouldn't go far. An hour later, Kai went looking for her. He found her in the center of the largest structure, a massive domed amphitheater open to the sky. She was standing before a central dais, staring at a monolithic stone slab. He approached slowly, making sure his footsteps were audible so he wouldn't startle her. She didn't turn around. "My mother used to tell me stories about a place where the Valari were not warriors," she said, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. "A place where we were scholars, diplomats. She said the galaxy was a garden, and we were the gardeners, not the locusts." She turned to face him. Her face was streaked with dried tears, but her expression was composed. She tried to change the empire. Kai. She went to the Senate. She proposed peace treaties. She wanted to end the expansion wars. And then she died, Kai guessed, stepping up beside her. "A shuttle accident," Zirixa said bitterly. "That was the official report. But I found her journals. She was meeting with someone. Someone from Earth. She turned back to the stone slab. There is something here. I can feel it. A resonance. She placed her hand on the center of the slab. The stone hummed. A beam of blue light shot up from the dais, piercing the darkness. It projected a holographic image into the air, a spinning geometric shape that coalesced into the face of a woman. She looked like Zirixa, but softer, her eyes full of a profound sadness. Zirixa gasped, "Mother!" The hologram began to speak. "If you are seeing this, then the light of our house has truly gone out. My daughter, or perhaps my son. Listen closely. The war is a lie. The Dominion and the Earth Senate. They are not enemies. They are partners." Kai stiffened. "What?" The recording continued. "The Senate supplies the Dominion with raw materials and unrestricted hyperspace lanes. In exchange, the Dominion attacks specific border worlds, worlds that refuse to join the Earth coalition. We create fear, and Earth provides protection. It is a cycle of manufactured war to consolidate power. Your father knows. He signed the treaty." The hologram flickered. "I have hidden the proof in the databases of this beacon. Take it. Expose them. Do not let my death be for nothing. Break the cycle." The image faded. Silence stretched between them, heavier than the gravity of the planet. "It was a lie," Zirixa whispered, her voice shaking with rage. "All of it. The glory, the honor. We are just mercenaries for your corrupt politicians." Kai felt a cold knot in his stomach. He had lost friends in those border wars. He had watched good soldiers die defending colonies that were being set up to fall. "We need that data," Kai said, his voice grim. "We need to get it off this rock." He reached for the data port on the side of the dais, pulling a drive from his pocket. A high-pitched screech tore through the air, shattering the moment. Kai spun around, drawing his pistol. From the shadows of the vaulted ceiling, a dark shape dropped. It was a machine, sleek and arachnid, with 6 razor-sharp legs and a single glowing red eye. "Hunter drone!" Kai shouted. It was a Valari seek and destroy unit. The fleet must have deployed them into the atmosphere to scour the planet's surface when they lost the ship's trail. The drone let out a mechanical shriek and lunged at Zirixa. She was faster. She drew her plasma blade, the violet energy crackling, and parried the drone's razor leg. The impact threw sparks across the room. Kai fired 3 shots, the heavy rounds pinging off the drone's armored carapace. It ignored him, focused entirely on the target it had been programmed to terminate. Zirixa ducked under a sweeping strike and slashed at the drone's underbelly. The blade scored the metal, but didn't penetrate deep enough. The drone backhanded her with a metal limb, sending her flying across the chamber. She hit the stone wall and crumpled. "Zirixa!" Kai yelled. The drone turned toward her, its red eye charging for a plasma blast. Kai didn't have a weapon that could pierce that armor. He scanned the room frantically. He needed an equalizer. His hand brushed the demolition charge on his belt, a compact block of high-explosive mining putty he kept for salvage work. He sprinted toward the drone. "Hey, tin can, over here!" He fired a round directly into the drone's sensor eye. The glass shattered. The machine shrieked, blinded and confused, and it spun around, flailing its limbs wildly. Kai slid across the floor, dodging a lethal spike leg by inches. He jammed the demolition charge into the joint of the drone's rear leg, armed the 3-second timer, and scrambled away. "Run!" he roared. He dove behind a pillar just as the charge detonated. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space. The shockwave knocked the wind out of him. Dust and stone rained down. When the smoke cleared, the drone was a smoking wreck, its legs blown off, its chassis split open. Kai coughed, waving the dust away. He scrambled over to Zirixa. She was groggy, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. But she was moving. She looked at the destroyed drone, then at Kai. You blew it up. I prefer the term aggressive disassembly. Kai wheezed, helping her up. But we have a problem. That explosion? Every sensor in the fleet just heard it. They know exactly where we are. We have the data, Zirixa said, clutching the drive Kai had dropped during the fight. Then let's go before they turn this temple into a crater. They ran back to the ship, the adrenaline masking their injuries. The rusty anvil was still battered, but the diagnostics showed the engines were back to 60% efficiency. It would have to be enough. They strapped in as the proximity alarms began to wail. 3 strike ships entering the atmosphere, Kai announced, his hands flying across the startup sequence. Estimated time to intercept, 2 minutes. Hold on, Kai said. He punched the ignition. The anvil roared, shaking off the dust of the dead planet. It lurched into the sky, fighting the gravity well. On the radar, 3 red dots were closing fast. Kai didn't aim for space. He aimed for the canyon network. He flew the heavy freighter like a starfighter, skimming the canyon walls, using the terrain to mask their thermal signature. They burst out of the cloud layer on the dark side of the planet, catching the strike team off guard. Before the Valari ships could lock on, Kai punched the hyperspace drive. The stars stretched, the planet vanished. Safe, Kai exhaled, slumping back. Zirixa stared at the data drive in her hand. We are not safe, Kai. We are the most dangerous people in the galaxy right now. Kai looked at her. She was bruised, dirty, and terrifyingly intense. And for the first time, he realized he wasn't just helping a fugitive. He was falling for her. Where do we go? She asked. Kai set the nav computer to Trenzith, the outlaw moon. If we are going to start a war, we need information, and I know a broker who owes me a favor. He looked at the empty space ahead. Get some sleep, Zirixa. Tomorrow, we will hunt. Trenzith was a festering wound on the side of the galaxy. A moon where the law was a suggestion and survival was the only currency that mattered. The atmosphere was thick with smog, trapped by a failing shield generator that gave the sky a permanent, sickly yellow bruise. Neon signs in a dozen alien languages flickered and buzzed, casting long, jagged shadows over the crowded streets of the Hive Market. Kaivos adjusted the collar of his jacket, trying to look less like a frantic fugitive and more like a casual traveler looking for a good time. Beside him, Princess Zirixa moved with the predatory grace of a jungle cat forced to walk on a leash. She had discarded her battle-scarred armor for a nondescript mechanic's jumpsuit they had scavenged from the ship's emergency locker. It was too big for her, swallowing her lithe frame, but she had belted it tight at the waist. And she still looked like she was ready to snap someone's neck. Relax, Kai muttered, leaning in close to her ear. You are walking like you are leading an invasion force. Zirixa glared at him sideways. I am walking with purpose. It is how one moves when one has a destination. You are supposed to be my girlfriend, not my bodyguard, Kai corrected, slipping his arm around her waist. He felt her entire body go rigid against his side, her muscles bunching as if she were preparing to throw him through a window. Easy, Kai whispered, tightening his grip slightly. If you break my arm, our cover is blown. Just breathe. Lean into me. We are just 2 lovers looking for a drink and some bad decisions. Zirixa let out a sharp exhale through her nose, a sound dangerously close to a growl. But she forced herself to relax. She leaned her head against his shoulder, though the movement looked painful. This is humiliating, she hissed, keeping her voice low so the passers-by wouldn't hear. I have commanded fleets. I have dueled warlords, and now I am parading around as the consort of a grease-stained human mechanic. Kai chuckled, steering them around a vendor selling skewered reptiles that smelled of sulfur and garlic. You wound me, princess. I clean the grease off my face, mostly, and try to look less like you want to execute everyone who makes eye contact. Lovers gaze, they giggle. They do not perform threat assessments on noodle chefs. I do not giggle, Syrixa stated flatly. Then just smile, Kai said, like you are happy to be here, like you are happy to be with me. Syrixa looked up at him. The neon light of a nearby bar washed over her face, painting her pale skin in shades of electric blue and magenta. For a second, the mask of the warrior slipped, and he saw the exhaustion underneath. She looked at him, really looked at him, and the corner of her mouth twitched upward. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was a genuine one, amused, perhaps, by the absurdity of their existence. If we survive this, Voss, I am going to demand hazard pay. Kai grinned. Put it on my tab. They moved deeper into the hive, the crowd pressing in around them. It was a sensory assault, the roar of engines overhead, the thumping bass of underground clubs, the shout of hawkers selling contraband tech and synthesized narcotics. The physical contact between them, initially a necessity of the disguise, began to shift into something else. To keep up the charade, Kai kept his hand on the small of her back, his thumb tracing small, idle circles against the fabric of the jumpsuit. Syrixa, in turn, hooked her arm through his, her fingers brushing against his wrist. In the press of the crowd, her body molded against his side. Every time they were jostled by a drunken dock worker or a hulking alien mercenary, she moved with him, not against him. It was intimate. It was confusing. And for Kai, it was becoming increasingly difficult to remember that this was just an act. He was hyper-aware of the heat of her skin, the scent of her hair, which smelled like ozone, and the strange, sweet soap she had found in his shower, and the dangerous electric energy she radiated. They reached a heavy Durasteel door nestled between a pawn shop and a derelict droid repair bay. A holographic eye hovered above the frame, scanning them with a red laser grid. Kai stepped forward. Tell Sola that the ghost of Antares is here to pay his tab. The hologram flickered, processing the code phrase. A moment later, the heavy door hissed and slid open. The room inside was a stark contrast to the filth of the street. It was cool, quiet, and smelled of expensive incense and old paper. Walls were lined with data servers humming softly, and the center of the room was dominated by a massive circular desk surrounded by floating holographic screens. Sitting behind the desk, with her boots propped up on the console, was Sola. She was a Twi'lek, her blue skin pristine, her leku draped elegantly over her shoulders. She wore a silk vest and a smirk that could cut glass. Kai Voss, she drawled, not bothering to stand. You look terrible, and did you get run over by a freighter? Or is this just your new aesthetic? Hello to you too, Sola, Kai said, guiding Syrixa into the room. The door slid shut behind them, cutting off the noise of the market. Sola's eyes flicked to Syrixa, looking her up and down with a critical, amused expression. And you brought a friend. Let me guess. You found another stray cat and you need me to check its microchip. This is... Kai started, but Syrixa stepped forward, shedding the disguise of the submissive girlfriend like a heavy coat. I am Syrixa of House Valari, she announced, her voice regaining its command resonance. And we require your decryption algorithms. Sola raised an eyebrow, looking from Syrixa to Kai. A Valari? Seriously, Kai? You know they bite, right? She is housebroken, mostly, Kai said, ignoring Syrixa's indignant glare. Sola, we need help. We have a data drive from a beacon on a dead world. It is encrypted with royal ciphers. Sola sighed, swinging her legs down from the desk. She spun her chair around and held out her hand. Nothing is encrypted to me, darling. Only expensive. Kai tossed her the drive. Sola caught it and slotted it into her console. Her fingers flew across the haptic interface, manipulating streams of cascading code. Kai and Zirixa stood in silence, the tension in the room thickening as the minutes ticked by. "Interesting," Sola murmured, her eyes darting across the data streams. "This isn't standard military encryption. It is genealogical coding. Old stuff." "Can you open it?" Zirixa asked, her fists clenched at her sides. Sola didn't answer. She just tapped a final key. The holographic screens flared, resolving into a complex three-dimensional web of documents, genetic profiles, and communication logs. "There," Sola said, leaning back. "It is a dossier, a background check, essentially. But it is flagged with eyes only for the Volare High Council and the Earth Senate Black Ops Division." Zirixa stepped closer to the light, her eyes scanning the floating text. "What is it?" "It is a profile on your betrothed," Sola said, her voice losing its mocking edge. "Prince Kalen of the Krell Syndicate." "I know who he is." Zirixa spat. "He is a warlord." "No," Sola corrected gently. "He is a vegetable." Zirixa froze. "What?" Sola expanded a medical file. "Look at the neural scans. The Krell leadership. They have been dead for years. This Prince Kalen, he is a clone, a biological shell with no higher brain function. He is genetically modified to be docile, suggestible, and completely incapable of independent thought." Kai stepped up beside Zirixa, reading the damning text. "He is a puppet," he whispered. "It gets worse," Sola said, pulling up another document. "This is a tactical memo from your father, the king. It is dated 3 months ago." Zirixa read the words, and her face went ashen. The color drained from her lips. "Subject: Operation Broken Crown." She read aloud, her voice trembling. "The princess's rebellion is anticipated. Her psychological profile indicates she will flee rather than submit. We will allow her escape. It will serve as the catalyst to declare her mentally unstable and strip her of her birthright. Once she is branded a traitor, the installation of the proxy Prince Kalen will proceed without opposition. The alliance will be secured by a signature that cannot say no." Zirixa stepped back, colliding with the edge of the desk. "It was all a lie," she whispered. "My escape. My resistance. They wanted me to run. They knew I would run." She looked at Kai, her eyes wide and shattered. "I thought I was fighting for my freedom. I thought I was making a choice. But I was just following a script they wrote for me." Kai reached for her. "Zirixa." "Do not," she snapped, flinching away from his touch. She turned to Sola. "Is there more?" Sola looked at her with pity, an expression Zirixa clearly hated. "Just the transfer orders. Earth Senate pays the Volare Elite. The Volare Elite install the Puppet King. The Puppet King gives Earth unrestricted access to the border resources. You were just the inconvenience that needed to be removed to make the math work." Zirixa stared at the glowing blue light of the hologram. Her entire life, her training, her defiance, her identity as the untamable daughter had been weaponized against her. She wasn't a warrior. She was a pawn who had moved exactly where the player pushed her. She let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. It was a broken, jagged noise. She spun on her heel and marched toward the door. "Where are you going?" Kai called out. "I need air," she choked out. The door hissed open and she vanished into the neon-soaked night. Kai turned to follow, but Sola caught his arm. "Let her go." "Kai. She just found out her entire existence is a punchline. She needs a minute." "She is going to do something stupid," Kai said, pulling his arm free. "She is Volare," Sola said with a shrug. "Stupid and dangerous is their factory setting. But you look like you care." "That is new." Kai didn't answer. He turned and ran out the door. He didn't find her immediately. He checked the main thoroughfare, the landing pads, even the weapons market. Finally, he found her in a narrow, dead-end alley behind a gambling den. She was sitting on a crate, a bottle of glowing amber liquid in her hand. Fire wine, the cheap industrial strength kind that burned your throat and erased your memory. She took a long pull from the bottle, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. Her eyes were glassy, the bioluminescent flecks in her irises swirling in chaotic patterns. "Go away, Voss," she slurred slightly. "The acting job is over. You don't have to pretend anymore." Kai walked slowly down the alley, stepping over puddles of stagnant water. "I am not pretending. Syrixa, put the bottle down. That stuff will rot your gut." "It burns," she said, looking at the bottle. "It burns the thoughts away, and that is what I need. I need to stop thinking." She stood up, swaying slightly. She looked at him, and the anger in her face crumbled into a raw, gaping desperation. "I am nothing. Kai, I am not a princess. I am not a rebel. I am just a hysterical little girl who ran away exactly when Daddy told her to." "You are not nothing," Kai said firmly, stopping a few feet from her. "You are the woman who crashed into my cargo bay and threatened to fly my ship with one hand. You are the tactical genius who saved us in the asteroid field. That wasn't a script. That was you." "Was it?" She laughed bitterly. "Or was that just my programming, genetic aggression, bred for war?" She took another step toward him, tossing the bottle aside. It shattered against the brick wall. She grabbed the lapels of his jacket, yanking him toward her. She was strong, even drunk. Her face was inches from his, her breath smelling of spice and ethanol. "Why are you still here?" she demanded, shaking him. "I am a broken weapon, Kai. There is no bounty to collect if I am not worth anything. There is no alliance to save. Leave me." "I am not going anywhere," Kai said, his voice calm, an anchor in her storm. She stared at him, her chest heaving. The proximity, the adrenaline, the alcohol, it all collided in a spark of volatile energy. She kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision. She smashed her lips against his, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him down. It was a kiss born of fury and grief, a desperate attempt to feel something other than the hollowness inside her. She bit his lip, tasted copper, and pressed her body against his with a frantic, crushing weight. Kai froze for a split second. Then his hands came up to hold her waist, steadying her. He didn't push her away, but he didn't match her aggression. He met her chaos with stillness. Syrixa pulled back just as abruptly as she had started. She stared at him, her chest heaving, her lips swollen and wet. She saw the look in his eyes, not lust, not pity, but a deep, unwavering concern. It terrified her. She shoved him backward, stumbling away. "No," she gasped. "No, I cannot do this." She turned and ran, scrambling up a stack of crates and vaulting over the alley wall, disappearing into the maze of the city. Kai wiped the blood from his lip. He didn't run this time. He knew where she would go. There was only one place left for her. He found her an hour later, back at the rusty anvil. She was sitting on the loading ramp, her knees pulled up to her chest, staring out at the fog-choked landing bay. The manic energy of the alcohol had faded, leaving her hollowed out and shivering. Kai walked up the ramp, stopping beside her. He didn't say a word. He just took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. She didn't look up. "I ruined everything, didn't I?" "You didn't ruin anything," Kai said, sitting down on the metal plating beside her. "I kissed you," she whispered. "Because I wanted to use you. I wanted to use you to forget. That is what my father does. He uses people. If I stop fighting, if I give in to that impulse, I will become one of them." She turned her head to look at him, tears finally spilling over her lashes. That is my fear. Kai, not death, but becoming him. A monster who consumes everything he touches. Kai reached out, cupping her face in his hands. His thumbs brushed away the tears, his touch calloused but infinitely gentle. You fight because it is all you have ever known. Zirixa, you were raised in a cage and told that biting was the only way to survive. But you are not him. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. A monster wouldn't care about becoming a monster. A monster wouldn't weep for the people she lost. You are allowed to be broken. Zirixa, and you are allowed to be more than just a weapon. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. More than a weapon, she repeated, the words tasting strange on her tongue. Come inside, Kai said softly. The air filters are fixed. It is warmer. She nodded, letting him pull her to her feet. The ship was quiet, the hum of the reactor a familiar lullaby. They walked to his quarters, the only room with a functional heater. The space was cramped, dominated by the narrow bunk, filled with the scent of machine oil and old books. Zirixa stood in the center of the room, the jacket slipping from her shoulders to the floor. She looked at Kai, who was standing by the door, giving her space, respecting her boundaries even now. She realized then that he had never tried to control her. Not when she threatened him. Not when she broke his ship. Not when she kissed him. He had simply stood there, a solid wall against which she could break herself without fear of judgment. She took a step toward him. Kai, she said. He looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. She reached out, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, down to the collar of his shirt. She felt the pulse beating steadily in his throat. I don't want to be alone tonight, she whispered, and I don't want to fight. She leaned in, her lips brushing against his, soft this time, hesitant, a question rather than a demand. Kai let out a ragged breath. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her flush against him. The kiss deepened, slow and deliberate. It wasn't the frantic clash of the alleyway. It was a conversation. She pulled back slightly, her eyes locking with his. Her voice dropped to that familiar throaty growl, but the edge was gone, replaced by a raw, terrifying honesty. I can't be tamed, Kai. It was a warning, a reminder of who she was, of the danger she brought, of the wildness that would never fully leave her blood. Kai looked at her, at the fierce, beautiful, broken creature in his arms. He smiled, a crooked, boyish smile that reached his eyes. I know, he whispered. He reached for the fastenings of her jumpsuit. I am not here to tame you. He slid the heavy fabric down her shoulders. She shivered, not from cold, but from the sensation of the air on her skin and the heat of his gaze. He undressed her slowly, treating every scar and bruise like a revelation. He didn't rush. He didn't take it. He uncovered her. When they finally lay together on the narrow bunk, skin to skin, the barriers were gone. There was no armor, no politics, no lies. The act of love-making was intense, a physical language for things they couldn't say. Zirixa, who had only known touch as a prelude to violence or a ritual of dominance, found herself unraveling. She tried to take the lead, to set the pace, but Kai met her strength with a yielding firmness that disarmed her. He held her hands, interlacing their fingers, grounding her when the sensation became too much. He kissed the scars on her shoulder, the bioluminescent markings on her ribs. He made her feel not like a prize to be won, or a weapon to be wielded, but like a woman. For the first time in her life, she surrendered, not out of weakness, but out of trust. She let go of the control she clutched so desperate to, and found that he caught her. Later, in the silence of the sleeping ship, Zirixa lay curled against him, her head resting on his chest. Her breathing was deep and even. She was asleep, deeply, truly asleep, in the arms of another being. It was a vulnerability that would have horrified the Valari High Council. Kai lay awake, staring at the ceiling. One of his arms was numb from her weight, but he didn't move. He listened to the rhythm of her breathing and the hum of the ship. He looked at the data drive sitting on the bedside table. The truth that would shatter an empire. They had this moment, this one night of peace in the eye of the hurricane. But tomorrow, the galaxy will come for them, the bounty hunters, the assassins, her father's fleet. Kai tightened his arm around her, pulling her closer. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, smelling the ozone and wildflowers. He knew their time was running out, but as he closed his eyes, he knew one other thing with absolute certainty. He would burn the galaxy down before he let them take her back. The morning light on Trenzith was never truly bright. It was a sickly, filtered gray that seeped through the smog layer like dirty water. Inside the cramped quarters of the rusty anvil, however, the atmosphere was warm, heavy with the scent of sleep and the lingering charge of the night before. Kai Voss woke up first. He lay still for a long moment, the weight of Zerixa's arm draped across his chest, anchoring him to reality. For the first time in years, the knot of tension that lived permanently between his shoulder blades was gone, replaced by a terrifying sense of vulnerability. He looked at the Valari princess sleeping beside him. In repose, the fierce lines of her face were softened, the bioluminescent markings on her skin pulsing with a slow, rhythmic light that matched her breathing. She looked less like a warlord and more like what she actually was, a young woman on the run from a galaxy that wanted to devour her. He carefully disentangled himself, sliding out of the bunk. He needed coffee, and he needed to check the ship's diagnostics before they made their next move. He pulled on his trousers and walked into the cockpit, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The main comms panel was blinking with a priority message. It was from Sola. "Come to the office. I have the final decryption key. And coffee." Kai smiled faintly. Sola was efficient. He had to give her that. He keyed a quick reply, "On my way," and grabbed his jacket. He considered waking Zerixa but decided against it. Let her sleep. She had earned a few more minutes of peace. He left the ship, locking the ramp behind him, and walked briskly through the waking market towards Sola's data haven. The streets were quieter now, the nocturnal chaos of Trenzith settling into a hungover lull. When he walked into Sola's office, the air was different. The hum of the servers seemed louder, more oppressive. Sola was standing by the window, looking out at the landing pads. She didn't turn around when the door hissed shut. "I have the key," Kai said, stepping up to the desk. "And I hope that coffee is fresh." Sola turned slowly. Her expression was unreadable, her leku twitching slightly, a sign of extreme stress Kai hadn't seen since their days running blockades together. "There is no coffee, Kai," she said softly. Kai stopped, his instincts flaring. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He scanned the room. It was empty, but the shadows felt wrong. "What is going on, Sola?" "I am sorry," she said, and she actually looked like she meant it. But the bounty on her head. 50 million credits is one thing, but the immunity deal? A full pardon for all past crimes? A clean slate on Earth? Kai took a step back, his hand dropping to the pistol at his hip. "Sola, what did you do?" "I didn't sell you to the bounty hunters. Kai, I have some standards. I sold you to the people who can actually protect you or at least, protect the Alliance." The blast doors behind Kai slammed shut with a deafening clang. A holographic projection flickered to life in the center of the room, towering over the desk. It was a man in a crisp, charcoal gray uniform of the Earth Coalition Navy, Admiral Vance. Kai knew the face. Vance was a legend in the Special Warfare Division, a man known for doing the dirty work that the Senate pretended didn't exist. "Lieutenant Voss," the Admiral said, his voice smooth and cold. "You have been a difficult man to track." Kai drew his weapon, aiming it at Sola, but he didn't fire. He couldn't. "Damn it. You sold us to the butchers," Kai spat at her. "I sold you to the law," Sola shouted back, her composure cracking. "Vance promised you wouldn't be hurt. He just wants the girl. He wants to stop the war." "Kai, the Admiral wants to bury the truth," Kai corrected, his eyes locked on the hologram. "You are going to kill her, aren't you? Because she knows about the puppet prince. We are going to secure a vital political asset," Vance said calmly. "And you, Lieutenant, are going to stand down. My strike team is already breaching your ship." Kai's blood ran cold. "Zirixa." He didn't think so. He fired 2 shots into the control panel of the blast door. Sparks showered the room, and the locking mechanism groaned but didn't release. He turned and fired a 3rd shot into the window Sola was standing next to. The reinforced glass spiderwebbed. "Kai, don't!" Sola screamed. Kai threw his shoulder against the weakened glass. It shattered outward, and he tumbled through it, falling 2 stories onto the awning of a noodle stall below. He rolled, hitting the street hard, ignoring the pain in his ribs. He sprinted toward the docking bay. The sound of gunfire erupted ahead, not the erratic pop of plasma pistols, but the rhythmic thumping roar of heavy military railguns. The rusty anvil was under siege. A sleek black dropship hovered over the landing pad, repelling soldiers in heavy combat armor onto the hull of his ship. They were cutting through the airlock. Kai didn't stop. He brought his pistol up, firing on the run. He took one trooper in the throat, the kinetic round punching through the weak point in the armor. He vaulted over a cargo crate, sliding into cover as the squad turned their fire on him. "Zirixa," he roared into his comms. "Zirixa, wake up!" Static crackled, then her voice, groggy but rapidly sharpening. "Kai, I hear gunfire. They are on the hull. Blow the hatch. I am unarmed. Improvise." Kai broke cover, laying down suppressing fire to keep the troopers pinned. He saw the cargo ramp of the anvil begin to lower, just a crack. Suddenly, the air shimmered. Zirixa burst from the ship, not through the ramp, but through the upper maintenance hatch. She wasn't wearing armor. She was wearing one of his oversized shirts and carrying a heavy industrial wrench she must have grabbed from the engineering deck. She moved like a blur, a whirlwind of violence. She leaped from the hull onto the nearest trooper, swinging the wrench with terrifying force. The impact crumpled the soldier's helmet. She grabbed his falling rifle midair, spun, and opened fire on the rest of the squad. Kai scrambled up the ramp as she provided cover. "Get in! We have to go!" Zirixa backed toward the ship, firing controlled bursts. She was brilliant, fearless. But she didn't see the sniper on the gantry above. Kai saw the glint of the scope a fraction of a second too late. "Sniper!" He lunged for her, trying to pull her inside. The shot was silent, a high-velocity Gauss round designed to punch through tank armor. It hit Zirixa in the back. She didn't scream. The impact threw her forward into Kai's arms. The force of it knocked them both backward onto the deck of the cargo bay. Kai hit the door control, screaming the command, "Seal it!" The ramp hissed upward, sparks flying as railgun rounds hammered the closing metal. Kai scrambled to the cockpit, dragging Zirixa with him. She was heavy, dead weight. He threw himself into the pilot's seat and slammed the throttle forward, overriding every safety protocol. The anvil roared, tearing away from the maglocks, smashing through the docking clamps, and rocketing into the smog-choked sky. He didn't look back. He punched the jump coordinates for deep space, random, unsafe numbers, and engaged the drive. The stars streaked, and they vanished into the void. Only then did he look at her. Zirixa was lying on the floor of the cockpit, her breath coming in shallow, wet gasps. The gauze round had punched through her lower back and exited her abdomen. It was a catastrophic wound. Her blood was pooling on the deck, dark and violet, glowing faintly as her biobiology tried desperately to knit the tissue back together. But it wasn't working. The wound was too massive. No, 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 Kai stammered, dropping to his knees beside her. He pressed his hands against the wound, trying to staunch the flow. Zirixa, stay with me. She looked up at him, her eyes unfocused. The bioluminescence in her skin was flickering, dimming like a dying bulb. Kai, she whispered, blood bubbling past her lips. Cold. You are not dying, Kai said, his voice shaking. I am not letting you die. He scooped her up, running toward the medical bay. It wasn't a real med bay, just a room with a first aid station and an old cryo sleep pod he used for smuggling perishable goods. He threw open the lid of the pod. It wasn't designed for medical stasis, it was just a freezer. But if he could lower her metabolic rate, freeze the cellular decay, he might buy her time. He laid her gently inside. She gripped his hand, her fingers weak. I can't be tamed, she murmured, a faint ghost of a smile touching her lips. Kai felt tears stinging his eyes. I know. Now sleep. He engaged the stasis sequence. The pod hissed, frost rapidly coating the glass. Zirixa's eyes closed, her breathing slowing until it stopped completely. She was suspended in ice and silence. Kai slumped against the side of the pod, burying his face in his hands. He sat there for a long time, listening to the silence of the ship. He was alone. Hours passed. Kai couldn't sleep. He couldn't fix the ship. He could only sit there and watch the frost patterns on the glass coffin that held the woman he loved. He needed a distraction. He needed to understand why. He pulled the data drive from his pocket, the one they had decrypted at Sola's. He walked to the ship's computer and plugged it in. There was one file he hadn't opened yet. The final part of her mother's message. He played it. The hologram of the late queen materialized in the dim light of the cockpit. She looked tired, her eyes full of a secret weight. My dearest Zirixa, the recording began. If you are seeing this, then you know about the political betrayal. But there is a deeper truth. A truth about you. Kai leaned forward. You have always felt different. The rage, the heightened senses, the ability to connect with others in ways the Iron House deems feral. The court calls it a defect. Your father calls it a curse. But it is neither. The queen paused, looking around as if checking for spies. Our bloodline is not pure Valari. Generations ago, before the expansion, my grandmother fell in love with a traveler from the Outer Rim. He was of the Ethel, a species of sensitives, empaths who could feel the heartbeat of a galaxy. They were wiped out because their empathy made them impossible to conquer. Kai stared at the screen. The Ethel. He had heard rumors of them, ghost stories spacers told about a race that could read minds. You are a hybrid, Zirixa, the queen continued. You have the strength of the Valari, but the soul of the Ethel. Your combat instincts are not bloodlust. They are empathy turned outward. You anticipate your enemy because you feel them. That is why the Iron House fears you. A warrior who can feel the pain of her enemy is a warrior who will eventually stop the war. The image flickered and faded. You are not unfit to rule, my daughter. You are the only one fit to rule. You are the bridge. Kai sat back, the revelation washing over him. Zirixa wasn't a monster. She was a hyper-empath forced into the mold of a killer. Her feral nature was just her system overwhelmed by the emotions of everyone around her, with no way to filter it out. A chime from the medical bay snapped him out of his trance. The stasis pod was beeping, vital signs stabilizing. Her bioregeneration had caught up while she was under. Kai rushed back to the bay. He initiated the thaw cycle. The frost melted. The lid hissed open. Zirixa gasped, arching her back as air rushed into her lungs. She coughed, rolling onto her side, shivering violently. Kai was there instantly, wrapping a thermal blanket around her. "I have you. You are safe." She looked at him, her eyes wide and disoriented. Then her gaze darted to the console in the hallway, where the hologram was still faintly glowing. "Yugakum," she rasped, her voice raw. "You watched it." Kai froze. "I did." She pushed him away, stumbling out of the pod. She was weak, naked, and shivering, but the fury was instant. That was private. Those were my mother's last words. "You needed to know," Kai said, standing his ground. "And I needed to know how to save you." "Save me." She laughed, a brittle, hysterical sound. "By finding out I am a half-breed freak. By learning that the reason I can't control myself is because I am infected with the DNA of a dead race." She grabbed a scalpel from the medical tray, brandishing it not at him, but at the air, at the universe. "I made a mistake, Kai, a biological contradiction." "No," Kai said firmly, stepping past the blade and grabbing her shoulders. "You are not a mistake. You are the evolution." He looked deep into her eyes. "You feel everything, don't you? In a fight, you know where they are going to move before they do. Not because you are fast, but because you feel their intent." Zirixa stopped fighting, the scalpel clattering to the floor. "Yes," she whispered. "It is loud. It is always so loud. The anger, the fear. It crashes into me. I have to scream to drown it out." Kai pulled her into his arms. "You don't have to scream anymore. We just have to teach you how to filter the noise." She slumped against him, the fight draining out of her. She buried her face in his neck, weeping silently. It wasn't the angry tears of before, it was a release, a letting go of a lifetime of shame. "We have to go," Kai said softly, stroking her hair. "There is a place. The coordinates were in the file, a hidden enclave, your mother's allies." The journey to the enclave took 3 days. They traveled in silence mostly, but it was a comfortable silence. The dynamic between them had shifted again. Zirixa was no longer the imperious commander or the wounded animal. She was quiet, introspective. She spent hours meditating, trying to feel the edges of her own mind. The coordinates led them to a planet in the nebula, a world of towering jungle canopies and bioluminescent flora. They landed in a clearing that turned out to be a camouflaged hangar. They were met by a dozen armed warriors. They weren't Valari Iron Guard. They were a ragtag mix of species, Valari exiles, human defectors, and others Kai couldn't identify. Leading them was an old Valari male with one eye and a mane of gray hair, General Torak. Kai recognized him from history vids. He had been the greatest tactician of the last war before disappearing. Torak looked at Zirixa, then at Kai. "You bring a human to our sanctuary. Princess? A soldier of the enemy?" "He is not the enemy," Zirixa said, stepping forward. Her voice was calm, lacking her usual aggression. "He is my mate." A ripple of shock went through the gathered rebels. Kai felt a flush of heat rise in his cheeks, but he stood taller. Torak narrowed his single eye. "A human mate. You sully your bloodline." "My bloodline is already mixed." "Torak," Zirixa said, raising her chin. "And it is stronger for it. He saved my life. He knows the truth about the hybridization, and he is the only reason I am standing here instead of in a grave." Torak stared at her for a long moment, then grunted. "He has the eyes of a soldier. Let us see if he fights like one." They were accepted, but tentatively. The next week was a blur of preparation. The Imperial Convergence, the gathering of all the great houses, was taking place in 10 days. It was their only chance to expose the conspiracy. They trained. It wasn't just combat drills, it was a fusion of styles. Kai taught Syrixa the discipline of human military tactics, fire and maneuver, cover and concealment, the logic of the battlefield. In return, Syrixa taught him how to listen. One afternoon, in a sparring circle surrounded by giant ferns, they practiced. "Don't think," Syrixa said, circling him. Her movements were fluid, like water flowing over stone. "Close your eyes, Kai. Feel where I am." Kai closed his eyes. He felt foolish. "I am going to strike. Now." Kai didn't wait for the sound. He felt a spike of intent, a sharp pressure in his mind. He ducked instinctively. Zerixa's legs swept through the air where his head had been a microsecond before. He opened his eyes, grinning. "Again," she commanded, but she was smiling too. They moved together, a dance of violence and trust. He was the anchor, the solid earth. She was the storm. They learned to fight back to back, covering each other's blind spots, not just with eyes, but with intuition. It was during these sessions that they formulated the plan. The rebels had a device, a neural link jump drive. It was experimental, dangerous technology that allowed a ship to jump through hyperspace with pinpoint accuracy. By using the pilot's mind as the navigational computer, it was faster than any machine, but it could burn out a human brain. But a hybrid brain, a brain built for connection? "I can do it," Syrixa said, looking at the schematics. "I can guide the ship directly into the atmosphere of the convergence world. We can bypass the blockade." "It is risky," Kai warned. "Everything is risky," she replied, taking his hand. The attack came at dawn on the 9th day. There was no warning, no sensors tripped, just the sudden, thunderous roar of orbital bombardment. The sky turned fire orange as kinetic rods slammed into the jungle canopy, vaporizing the outer defenses. "Ambush!" Torak screamed, rallying his men. Drop pods rained down from the clouds, black, sleek coffins that smashed into the earth and burst open to reveal armored figures. They weren't Valeri. They were Earth Black Ops, the Shadow Unit. Admiral Vance had found them. Kai and Zerixa were in the hangar, working on the rusty anvil. The ground shook so hard that Kai was thrown off the wing. "We have to launch!" Kai yelled, scrambling up. "Not without them," Zerixa shouted, pointing toward the bunker where Torak and his rebels were making a stand. She drew her plasma blade and sprinted toward the fight. "Zerixa, wait!" Kai grabbed his rifle and ran after her. The battle was a slaughter. The Shadow Unit moved with mechanical precision, their tech far superior to the rebels' scavenged gear. Torak fell, his chest blown open by a railgun round. Zerixa screamed, a sound of pure psychic agony. She unleashed a wave of telekinetic force, her empathic power manifesting as a physical shockwave that knocked 3 soldiers flat. She cut through them, her blade a blur of violet light. She was trying to reach the children, the families hiding in the back of the bunker. But there were too many of them. Kai reached her, firing rapidly, dropping a soldier who was aiming a rocket launcher at her back. "Zerixa, we can't save them. The bunker is compromised." "We have to try," she cried, tears streaming down her face. Kai grabbed her arm, spinning her around. A mortar shell exploded 20 feet away, showering them with dirt and blood. "If we die here, the truth dies with us," Kai shouted over the roar of the carnage. "Torak is dead. The others are gone. We have to go to the convergence. It is the only way to make this mean something." Zerixa looked at the burning bunker, then at Kai. She saw the logic, cold and hard, in his eyes. She hated it, but she accepted it. She nodded, a single sharp jerk of her head. They sprinted back to the ship, dodging laser fire and falling trees. They scrambled up the ramp of the rusty anvil just as a squad of Black Ops soldiers crested the ridge. Bullets pinged off the hull as the ramp closed, Kai threw himself into the pilot's chair. Zirixa slid into the co-pilot's seat, grabbing the neural link helmet they had stolen from the rebel tech lab. "Strap in!" Kai yelled, firing the thrusters. The ship lurched into the air, shaking violently as the Black Ops unit focused their fire on the engines. Warning, hyperdrive navigation offline. The computer screeched. "We don't need the computer," Zirixa shouted, jamming the helmet onto her head. Her eyes glowed with blinding intensity as the interface spikes dug into her temples. "Kai, link the drive to my station!" Kai's fingers flew across the board. "Linked! Do it! Zirixa!" She screamed as the neural connection slammed into her mind. She became the ship. She felt the engines as her legs, the sensors as her eyes. She reached out with her mind, grabbing the fabric of space-time. On the ground, the Black Ops commander watched as the battered freighter didn't accelerate into orbit, but simply vanished. It didn't jump. It folded reality around itself. Inside the wormhole, there was no starlight. There was only the psychic scream of two minds, the human soldier and the alien princess, fused together in the dark, hurtling toward a destiny that would either save the galaxy or burn it to ash. They were gone, and the war was just beginning. The universe did not just bend when the neural link drive engaged, it shattered. There was no transition, no star lines stretching into infinity, no hum of the sublight engines. There was only a sudden, violent absence of physical reality, replaced by a blinding white roar that was not sound, but pure thought. Kai Voss screamed, but he could not hear his own voice. He could not feel his hands on the controls or the harness digging into his chest. He was no longer a pilot in a cockpit. He was unmoored, a consciousness drifting in a turbulent sea of memory and potentiality. And he was not alone. He felt Zirixa, not the woman sitting next to him, but the essence of her. The barriers of skin and bone, of language and culture were stripped away by the psychic pressure of the jump. Her mind bled into his, and his into hers, until there was no way to tell where the human ended and the Valari began. They fell together through a kaleidoscope of lives they had never lived. The first vision hit them like a physical blow. The air smelled of rain and wet earth. Kai was standing in a field of tall golden grain that whispered in a gentle breeze. He looked down at his hands. They were calloused, stained with soil, not grease or gun oil. He wore a rough-spun tunic. He felt a deep, abiding peace in his chest, a sensation so foreign it made him ache. He turned. Zirixa was walking toward him from a small wooden cottage on the hill. She was not wearing armor. She wore a simple dress of blue linen, her white hair loose and flowing around her shoulders. There was no war in her eyes, no hunted look. She smiled at him, a smile of easy familiarity, and held out a cup of water. "The harvest is good this year," she said. Her voice was soft, stripped of its command resonance. "It is," Kai replied, taking the cup. He felt the warmth of her fingers against his. "We have enough for the winter." He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a desperate, stolen kiss in a dark alley. It was the kiss of a husband to a wife of 20 years, steady, deep, and secure. They were old together in this place. They were safe. The scene fractured, dissolving into smoke. They were standing on a ridge overlooking a vast alien canyon. The sky was a bruised purple. They were clad in leather and furs, holding primitive spears. They were scouts for a nomadic tribe, watching a herd of massive beasts migrate across the plains. "Do you see them?" Zirixa whispered, crouching beside him. Her shoulder pressed against his. "I see them," Kai answered. "We hunt at dawn." He looked at her. Her face was painted with tribal markings, fierce and beautiful. She was his shield mate. He would die for her, and she for him. It was a simple, brutal truth that required no words. The vision spun again, faster this time, They were lovers in a high-tech spire city, laughing over wine. They were children playing in the mud of a riverbank. They were old, dying in the same bed, holding hands as the light faded. 1,000 lifetimes flashed between them in the span of a heartbeat. Every fear Zirixa had ever hidden, every scar Kai had buried, it was all laid bare. He felt her terrifying loneliness, the crushing weight of her crown. She felt his guilt, the ghosts of the soldiers he had failed to save. They saw each other, truly saw each other. And then, the universe snapped back into place with a deafening crack. The rusty anvil slammed back into normal space. The inertia threw them forward against their restraints. The cockpit was screaming, alarms blaring, sparks showering from the overhead console, the smell of ozone and burnt wiring choking the air. Kai gasped, his lungs seizing as if he had just surfaced from deep water. He ripped the Neuralink helmet off his head, throwing it to the deck. His nose was bleeding. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely grip the armrests. Zirixa slumped in the co-pilot's seat. She looked wrecked, her eyes wide and dilated, her chest heaving. She slowly peeled the interface contacts from her temples. Silence stretched between them, heavy and vibrating with the aftershocks of the connection. Kai looked at her. The image of her in the blue dress, handing him water in the sunlight, was burned into his retinas. He could still feel the phantom warmth of the sun on his back. Zirixa turned her head. She looked at him with a raw, terrified vulnerability that broke his heart. "I saw," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I saw us." "I saw it too," Kai rasped, unbuckling his harness. He stumbled out of the chair and fell to his knees beside her. She reached out, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "It was real, Kai. In the space between seconds, it was real. I felt your heart. I felt your love. It was not a strategy. It was not a transaction." She leaned forward, gripping his shoulders. "I love you." The words hung in the chaotic air of the cockpit. It was the final surrender. The princess who could not be tamed had not been conquered. She had simply ceased to fight the one thing that could save her. Kai pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck. "I love you, Zirixa. I loved you in the field. I loved you on the ridge. And I love you right here, in this broken ship." They held each other tightly, grounding themselves in the physical reality of their bodies. The hallucinations had broken down the final walls. There were no secrets left. They were two halves of the same soul, forged together in the fire of the jump. But reality was not done with them. A proximity alert chimed, cutting through the moment. Kai pulled back, wiping the blood from his nose. He looked at the sensor display. "We are here," he said, his voice grim. Through the cracked viewport, a massive structure loomed, the Imperial Convergence Station. It was a city in space, a sprawling wheel of gold and silver rotating slowly above the atmosphere of a gas giant. Hundreds of ships, delegations from every great house in the Dominion, were docked at its spires. The rusty anvil was drifting, its engines dead, bleeding coolant into the void. They had arrived in the debris field of the station's outer ring, masked by the junk and the magnetic interference. "We have one shot," Kai said, helping Zirixa to her feet. "The drive is fried. We are not flying out of here." Zirixa looked at the station, her expression hardening. The softness of the vision was gone, replaced by a cold, regal resolve. But she was different now. The anger was gone. In its place was a calm, terrifying certainty. "We do not need to fly out," she said. "We just need to get in." They moved to the cargo bay. Zirixa opened the crate she had salvaged from the ruins of her mother's estate on the rebel moon. Inside lay the ceremonial armor of the High Valari. It was not the combat plate she usually wore. This was a work of art, burnished white metal inlaid with gold filigree, a flowing cloak of deep crimson, and a helm that resembled a crowned hawk. It was the armor of a queen. Kai worked quickly, his technician's hands steady despite the exhaustion. He took the broadcast emitter from the ship's comms array and stripped it down. He wove the microfilament wires into the fabric of Zerixa's cloak, hiding the lens in the gold clasp at her throat. "You are the transmitter," Kai explained, securing the final connection. "When you speak, this rig will hijack the station's internal frequency. It will beam your mother's message, the DNA profiles, and the Senate files to every screen, every data pad, and every hollow emitter in the convergence." Zerixa fastened the greaves to her legs. "And you?" Kai held up a bundle of gray cloth he had scavenged from the laundry recycler. "A servant's tunic." "I am your shadow," he said with a wry grin. "Someone has to carry your train." Zerixa paused, placing her hand on his chest. "If we do this, Kai, there is no going back. My father will kill us." "Let him try," Kai said. They accessed the station through a waste disposal airlock on the lower maintenance levels. It was a filthy, dangerous climb, but they moved with the synchronized precision they had forged in the training circle. Kai hacked the door seals. Zerixa used her enhanced strength to pry open the rusted gears. They slipped into the service corridors of the Great Hall. The air here smelled of sterile cleaner and expensive perfume, a sharp contrast to the ozone of the ship. Above them, the muffled roar of thousands of voices drifted down. The convergence had begun. Kai adjusted the servant's tunic, which was tight across his shoulders. He kept his head down, adopting the submissive posture of an indentured worker. Zerixa stood tall, the crimson cloak hiding the damage to her body, the helmet obscuring her face. They reached the service entrance behind the main dais. Through the gap in the curtains, they could see the scale of the event. The Great Hall was a cavernous space of marble and light. Banners of the 12 great houses hung from the ceiling. In the center, on a raised platform of obsidian, stood King Valar. He was a giant of a man, wearing armor of black iron, his face hard and cruel. Beside him stood Prince Kaelin, the clone. He was handsome in a plastic, manufactured way, but his eyes were empty. He stood perfectly still, a doll waiting to be played with. Members of the High Council. King Valar's voice boomed, amplified by the acoustics of the hall. "Today, we secure the future of the Dominion. Today, the Iron House and the Krell Syndicate become one." Kai checked the detonator in his pocket, not for a bomb, but for the broadcast rig. He looked at Zerixa. "Now," he whispered. Zerixa did not sneak onto the stage. She strode out. The heavy curtains parted as she walked onto the obsidian dais, her footsteps ringing loud and clear in the sudden silence. The crimson cloak billowed behind her. She looked like a vengeance spirit returned from the grave. King Valar froze mid-sentence. The thousands of delegates in the hall fell silent, a hush of shock sweeping through the crowd. They had been told she was dead. They had been told she was a traitor who had perished in the Outer Rim. Zerixa reached up and removed her helmet. Her white hair cascaded down her back. She looked at her father, her eyes burning with a blue fire that was brighter than any spotlight. "I object," she said. Her voice was not amplified, but it carried to the back of the hall. "Zerixa," the king snarled, his hand dropping to the sword at his hip. "You dare show your face? Guards, seize her!" 4 royal guards in gold armor stepped forward, their halberds lowered. Kai stepped out from the shadows behind her. He did not look like a servant anymore. He moved with the coiled menace of a viper. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply stood at her right hand, his hand hovering near the concealed pistol beneath his tunic. "I am not here to surrender, Father," Zerixa announced, her voice rising. "I am here to testify." She looked out at the crowd. The representatives of the houses were murmuring, confusion turning to anger. "You have been lied to," she shouted. "The war is a lie, the alliance is a lie. And this," she pointed a finger at the vacant Prince Kalen, "this is a puppet made of meat and programming." "Silence her," the king roared. The guards charged. Kai moved. He hit the detonator on the rig. The air above the dais shimmered and exploded into light. The massive holographic projection of the late queen appeared, hovering 50 feet tall above the gathering. The guards faltered, looking up in horror at the face of the dead monarch. "My dearest Zirixa." The queen's voice thundered through the hall. "The bloodline is not pure. Earth Senate. Conspiracy." Documents began to scroll alongside the video. DNA sequences proving Kalen was a clone. Bank transfers from Earth to the Iron House. Tactical orders signed by King Valar to sacrifice Valari troops for political gain. The hall erupted. It was pandemonium. The representatives of the Whisper House, the Scholar House, and the Outer Rim faction surged forward, screaming at the revelation. The lie that had held the Dominion together, the lie of purity and honor, shattered in an instant. Zirixa stood in the center of the storm, an island of calm. "See the truth," she commanded. "See what you have been dying for." "Kill them!" King Valor screamed, losing control. "Kill them all." The loyalist guards recovered from their shock and lunged. Kai met them. He ducked under a swinging halberd, driving his shoulder into the guard's midsection. He grabbed the shaft of the weapon, spun, and used it to sweep the legs of the second attacker. He wasn't fighting with honor. He was fighting to win. He drew his pistol, firing 3 rapid stun shots into the visors of the approaching soldiers. "Go!" Kai shouted to Zirixa, parrying a sword strike with the stolen halberd. "Get to the council seats! Rally the houses!" Zirixa hesitated, looking at him. "I can hold them," Kai roared, kicking a guard into the front row of the audience. "Move!" Zirixa turned and ran toward the podium where the house elders sat, shouting for them to look at the data. Kai was alone on the dais with 10 guards. He was a whirlwind of motion, a blur of gray tunic and stolen steel. He fought with the desperate ferocity of a man protecting his heart. He broke bones, shattered armor, and used every dirty trick he had learned in the scrapyards. But there were too many of them. A shield slam caught him in the back, sending him sprawling. A boot connected with his face. He rolled, firing blindly, scrambling back to his feet. He was bleeding from a dozen cuts, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He saw King Valar retreating through a side door, dragging Zirixa with him. The king had intercepted her before she could reach the elders. "No!" Kai shouted. He tried to follow, but a wall of gold armor blocked his path. He gritted his teeth, dropped the empty pistol, and raised his fists. He couldn't save her. He could only buy her time. Zirixa was thrown into the king's private antechamber. She stumbled, crashing into a display case of ancient weaponry. Glass shattered around her. King Valor slammed the heavy oak doors and locked them. The sounds of the riot outside were muffled, distant. He turned to face her. The mask of the benevolent ruler was gone. He looked like a cornered beast. "You foolish girl," he hissed, pacing toward her. "You have destroyed everything. Do you know how long I worked to build this alliance? Do you know what I sacrificed?" "You sacrificed your honor." Zirixa spat, standing up and shaking the glass from her cloak. "You sacrificed your people. You sacrificed Mom." Valor stopped. He laughed, a cold, dry sound. "Your mother?" She was weak. She wanted peace in a galaxy that understands only force. She was going to give away our birthright to the humans. "So you killed her?" Zirixa said it wasn't a question. "I did what was necessary," Valor roared. "I removed an obstacle just as I will remove you." He drew his sword, a massive blade of dark matter ore that hummed with a low, deadly pitch. You are a defect, Zirixa, a hybrid abomination. You were never fit to sit on the Iron Throne. Zirixa looked at the man who had raised her, the man she had spent her entire life trying to please. She saw him now not as a father, not as a king, but as a small, frightened man terrified of losing control. She reached under her cloak and drew her plasma blade. The violet energy snapped to life, casting long shadows in the room. I am not a defect, she said, her voice steady. I am the future. Valor charged. He was strong, incredibly so, and he fought with the brutal, overpowering style of the Iron House. He swung the dark matter sword in a crushing overhead arc. Zirixa didn't block it. She couldn't. The weight would have shattered her arm. Instead, she flowed. She stepped inside his guard, feeling the intent of the strike before his muscles even twitched. She dodged the blade by a fraction of an inch, the wind of it whipping her hair. She slashed at his leg, scoring the armor. He roared in frustration, spinning to strike again. They danced across the room, smashing furniture and slashing tapestries. Valor was power. Zirixa was precision. He fought with rage. She fought with empathy. She could feel his fear, his desperation, his sloppy, frantic need to silence her. He overextended on a thrust. Zirixa saw the opening. She felt it. She sidestepped, grabbed his wrist and used his own momentum to hurl him into the wall. He hit face first, his sword clattering across the floor. He slumped to his knees, dazed. Zirixa was on him in a second. She kicked him onto his back and pinned him, the tip of her plasma blade hovering an inch from his throat. The king looked up at her. His helmet was gone. He was bleeding from the nose. He looked old and pathetic. Do it, he wheezed, baring his teeth in a bloody smile. Finish it. Prove you are my daughter. Prove you have the stomach for the Iron Throne. Strike me down, and you become the killer I always wanted you to be. Zirixa's hand trembled. The heat of the blade radiated against her skin. All she had to do was push, 1 inch. 1 inch and the monster was gone. 1 inch and she was safe. 1 inch and she had vengeance for her mother. The rage boiled in her gut. The instinct to kill, to dominate, to destroy the threat, it was screaming in her blood. It was the Valari way. It was the way of the Iron House. She looked into her father's eyes. She saw the expectation there. He wanted her to do it. Because if she killed him in anger, if she executed him in cold blood, she would validate his entire worldview. She would prove that power was the only truth. She would become him. You are allowed to be more than just a weapon. Kai's voice echoed in her mind. She remembered the vision of the wheat field. She remembered the blue dress. She remembered the feeling of peace. She looked at the blade. She looked at her father. The hum of the plasma energy was the only sound in the room. Zirixa tightened her grip on the hilt. Her knuckles turned white. She raised the blade high, preparing for the death blow. Her father flinched, closing his eyes. Zirixa froze. The blade hovered in the air, a violet guillotine that refused to fall. The violet hum of the plasma blade was the loudest sound in the universe. It vibrated in Zirixa's grip, a hungry electric purr that begged to taste royal blood. Beneath her, King Valor squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the strike that would end his reign and seal his daughter's fate as the monster he had always claimed she was. Time seemed to liquefy, slowing down to a thick, sluggish crawl. Zirixa could see the individual beads of sweat on her father's forehead. She could smell the copper tang of the blood from his broken nose and the acrid smoke of the ruined tapestries burning in the corner of the antechamber. The rage in her chest was a physical thing, a dark, coiling serpent made of years of shame, manipulation, and the cold, aching void where her mother's love should have been. Kill him. The instinct screamed. It was the voice of the Iron House. It was the voice of the training masters who had beaten the empathy out of her. It was the voice of the galaxy that expected a Valari princess to be nothing more than a blade in the dark. She tightened her grip. The muscles in her forearm coiled. The blade dipped a fraction of an inch lower, searing the air near Valar's throat. The heavy oak doors of the antechamber did not open. They shattered. The wood splintered inward with a deafening crash, the lock mechanism disintegrating under the force of a massive impact. Zirixa did not look up. Her focus locked on her father, but she felt the presence instantly. It washed over her psychic senses like a wave of cool, stabilizing water in a desert of fire. Kai Voss stumbled into the room. He was a wreck. His servant's tunic was shredded, soaked dark with blood that was mostly his own. His left eye was swollen shut, purple and angry, and he favored his right leg, dragging it slightly as he moved. He held a dented riot shield in one hand, the metal scarred by laser fire, and his knuckles were raw meat. He looked like he had gone 12 rounds with a trash compactor and lost, but he was standing. He dropped the shield. It clattered loudly on the marble floor, the sound cutting through the murderous trance that held Zirixa. "Don't," Kai rasped. His voice was wet, breathless, but it carried the same steady, unshakable calm that had grounded her in the asteroid field. Zirixa's eyes flickered to him. The blue fire in her irises dimmed slightly. "Kai," she whispered, the name tearing out of her throat. Kai limped forward, ignoring the king, ignoring the burning room. He walked straight to her, stepping into the lethal radius of the plasma blade without flinching. He stopped 2 feet away, close enough that she could see the blood on his teeth when he breathed. "You do not have to do this, Zirixa." "He deserves it," she snarled, her voice wavering. "He killed her." "Kai, he killed my mother. He sold me. He turned me into this weapon. If I let him live, he wins." "No," Kai said softly. "If you kill him, he wins. If you strike him down in anger, you become exactly what he wants you to be. You prove him right. You validate every lie he ever told about you being a feral beast who cannot control her instincts." Kai reached out. He did not grab the weapon. He did not grab her arm. He placed his hand gently on her chest, right over her heart. "You are not a weapon, Zirixa. You are the bridge." Zirixa looked down at his hand. It was dirty, scarred, and trembling with exhaustion. But it was warm. Through the contact, she felt his emotions flooding into her empathic senses. There was no fear. There was no judgment. There was only a profound, aching love and a fierce belief in who she was. "You have already changed everything," Kai whispered. "Look at what you did out there. You didn't conquer them with a sword. You conquered them with the truth. You don't need his blood to finish this." Zirixa let out a shuddering breath. The tears she had been holding back finally spilled over, hot tracks cutting through the dust on her face. The rage, which had felt infinite a moment ago, suddenly felt small and petty. It crumbled, leaving behind a vast, terrifying clarity. She looked down at her father. Valor opened his eyes, staring up at her with a mixture of confusion and contempt. He did not understand. He was waiting for the blow. He could not comprehend a world where power did not demand blood. And that, Zirixa realized, was his prison. She deactivated the blade. The violet light vanished, plunging the room back into the dim, smoky gloom. "I am not your daughter," she said, her voice low and steady. "And I am not your executioner. I am Zirixa of the Ethel, and I pity you." She stepped back, holstering the hilt of her weapon. She reached into her cloak and pulled out the broadcast rig Kai had built. The red light was still blinking. The channel was still open. The entire convergence, the gathered chaos in the Great Hall, the ships in orbit, the listening galaxy, was waiting. She lifted the device to her lips. "Do not look for a king to save you," she spoke, her voice broadcast to billions. "Do not look for a warlord to lead you. The era of the Iron House is over. We have spent centuries bleeding for a lie, believing that strength comes from domination. But look at where it has brought us. To the edge of extinction. To a silence where only the dead have a voice." She looked at Kai, who was leaning against an overturned table, watching her with a crooked, painful smile. "My mother believed that the strongest thing a warrior can do is lay down their sword," Zirixa continued. "She believed that empathy is not a weakness, but the only power that can truly unite us. We are not Valari or human or hybrid. We are alive, and we deserve to live for something other than war." She dropped the device on the chest of the fallen king. "Choose," she said to the galaxy. "Choose to be more." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, from the great hall, a sound began. It started as a rumble, low and uncertain. Then it grew. It was the sound of weapons being sheathed. It was the sound of voices rising not in a war cry, but in a chant. "Shiriksha, Shiriksha, Shiriksha." The doors to the antechamber burst open again. This time, it was not Kai. It was a squad of younger Valari knights, their armor painted in the colors of the Whisper House and the Scholar factions. They rushed in, weapons drawn, but when they saw the king on the floor and Zirixa standing over him, they stopped. They did not attack. They knelt. Kai pushed himself off the table, limping to her side. He took her hand, squeezing it tight. "I think you just started a revolution, princess," he murmured. "I think we just survived one," she corrected, leaning her weight against him. The days that followed the convergence were a blur of political upheaval that reshaped the map of the sector. The revelation of the hybrid bloodline and the Earth Senate conspiracy did not result in the civil war everyone had feared. Instead, it caused a fracture that ran down generational lines. The younger houses, tired of the endless draft and the meat grinder of the border conflicts, rallied behind Zirixa's message. They seized control of the fleet, grounding the warships and arresting the loyalist commanders. King Valar was taken into custody, stripped of his titles, and imprisoned in the very tower where he had once locked Zirixa's mother. He would spend the rest of his life screaming at walls that would never answer him. But the old guard, the entrenched powers of the Dominion and the embarrassed, scrambling politicians of the Earth Senate, could not allow Zirixa to remain. She was a symbol too potent, too dangerous to be left in play. She was a radical who had upended the social order. She was a hybrid who defied the purity laws that were still technically on the books. A compromise was brokered in the shadowed back rooms of diplomacy. Civil war would be averted, the borders would be demilitarized, but Zirixa could not rule. She would not be queen. She was to be exiled, banished to the fringes of known space, forbidden from ever entering the core worlds or holding political office again. It was a sentence meant to be a punishment. Zirixa accepted it as a liberation. 3 days after the convergence, Kai stood in a sterile white observation deck on the Earth Coalition flagship Endeavor. Opposite him sat Admiral Vance, the man who had ordered Zirixa's death, now looking smooth and unflappable as he poured tea from a silver service. "Lieutenant Voss," Vance said, pushing a datapad across the table. "You have become quite the headache for the Department of Naval Intelligence." "I aim to please, Admiral," Kai said, his arms crossed. He was still bandaged, his face a map of bruising, but he wore clean civilian clothes. "We have a situation," Vance said, sipping his tea. "The public loves romance, the rogue soldier and the alien princess. It plays well on the news feeds. It makes it difficult for us to court-martial you for high treason, theft of military property, and assaulting a superior officer." "Is that what this is?" Kai nodded at the datapad. My court-martial? No, Vance said. That is your pardon. Full reinstatement of rank, back pay for the 5 years you were missing, a pension, and a quiet assignment to a training academy on Mars. You could live out the rest of your days in comfort. Kai, you would be a hero. Kai looked at the pad. There were a lot of credits. Enough to buy a new ship. Enough to never worry about scrap prices again. What is the catch? Vance smiled, a thin, reptile expression. The catch is Zirixa. She is being exiled to the moon of Odera for it is a sanctuary colony, strictly non-aligned. If you sign this, you disavow her. You issue a statement saying you were coerced by her psychic manipulation. You walk away, and we close the file on the Valari incident. Kai stared at the Admiral. He thought about the way Zirixa looked when she slept. He thought about the feeling of her mind touching him in the jump. He thought about the wheat field and the blue dress. He picked up the datapad. He looked at the staggering sum of money. Then, calmly and deliberately, he snapped the device in half. The plastic crunched loudly in the quiet room. He dropped the pieces into Vance's tea. You can keep the pension, Kai said, standing up, and you can keep the hero status. I never liked the uniform anyway. Vance sighed, wiping a splash of tea from his cuff. You are making a mistake, Voss. She is an exile. She has nothing. You are throwing your life away for a political liability. No, Kai said, turning to the door. I am going home. Where she goes, I go. He walked out of the observation deck, leaving the Admiral and the Earth Coalition behind him forever. 6 months later. The moon of Odera 4 was not a desolate rock. It was a jewel, orbiting a gas giant that filled the night sky with rings of gold and azure. Odera was a world of bioluminescent jungles, singing crystal caves, and oceans that glowed with phosphorescent life. It was a place where the barrier between the physical and the spiritual felt thin, a natural amplifier for those with empathic gifts. It was the perfect place to heal. On a cliff overlooking the Silver Sea, a settlement had sprung up. It was not built of heavy iron or prefab concrete. It was woven into the living rock, a network of open-air pavilions and glass domes. It was called Sanctuary. Kai wiped the sweat from his forehead as he tightened the final bolt on the solar array. He was shirtless, his skin tanned by the alien sun, his scars fading into white lines against his muscles. He climbed down the ladder, tossing his wrench into a toolbox. Down in the courtyard, he could hear laughter. He walked to the railing and looked down. Zirixa was there. She was wearing simple robes of white and gray, her hair braided back with vines. She was sitting in a circle of children, hybrids, war orphans, and young sensitives who had been cast out by the other houses. She was teaching them. Close your eyes, she was saying, her voice carrying on the breeze. Do not push the noise away. Let it flow through you like wind through the leaves. You are not the stone that blocks the river. You are the river. A young Valari boy, whose hands were glowing with uncontrolled kinetic energy, took a deep breath. The glow softened, turning from a violent red to a calm, steady blue. Zirixa smiled, reaching out to brush a lock of hair from his face. It was a smile of pure, unburdened joy. Kai watched her, a lump forming in his throat. She had built this in 6 months. She had turned a prison sentence into a paradise. She was the unofficial queen of the outcasts, leading not with decrees and threats, but with grace and patience. She healed their traumas because she understood them. She looked up, sensing his gaze before he even moved. Her eyes met his, and the connection between them hummed, a warm, golden thread that stretched from his heart to hers. She stood up, dismissing the class. The children scattered, running toward the dining hall. Zirixa walked up the stairs to the terrace where he stood. She moved differently now. The predatory edge was gone, replaced by a fluid, grounded power. She didn't look like she was ready to fight the world anymore. She looked like she was part of it. "The solar array is online," Kai said, handing her a water flask. "We should have hot water in the north dorms by tonight." "You are a miracle worker," she said, taking a sip. "I am a mechanic," Kai corrected, leaning against the railing. "I just fix things. You are the miracle worker. I saw what you did with the unstable kid earlier. A year ago. You would have thrown him through a wall." Zirixa laughed, a soft musical sound that mingled with the wind chimes hanging from the roof. "A year ago. I thought throwing people through walls was the only way to solve a problem. I was very limited in my vocabulary." She stepped closer, resting her hands on his chest. Her skin was cool, smelling of the sea and the sweet nectar of the jungle flowers. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. Her eyes searched his face, a hint of the old insecurity flickering there. "You gave up everything, Kai. Your rank, your home. Your ship is grounded in a garden, growing moss. You could be an admiral by now." Kai looked at her. He looked at the settlement below, at the peace they had carved out of the chaos. He looked at the rings of the gas giant turning slowly in the sky. "I didn't give up on anything," he said. "I traded up." He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him. The magnetic pull between them was as strong as ever, but it wasn't desperate anymore. It was the gravity of two stars in a stable orbit. "I used to think freedom was having a full fuel tank and no flight plan," Kai mused. "But that wasn't freedom. That was just running. This being here with you, watching you build something real. This is the first time I have ever been free." Zirixa smiled, tracing the line of his jaw with her thumb. "You know, the council still calls me the untamed princess in their reports. They think I am down here plotting my revenge, sharpening my claws." "Let them talk," Kai said. "They are terrified of you. They can't understand how someone with your power walked away from the throne." Zirixa leaned up, her lips brushing his ear. Her voice dropped to a whisper, teasing and intimate. "And you? Do you think I am dangerous?" Kai grinned. "I think you are the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. But not because of the claws." She pulled back, raising an eyebrow, a spark of her old arrogance flashing in her eyes. "Oh?" She pressed closer, her body molding to his. "You never really tamed me, Kai Voss," she said, a playful growl in her voice. Kai laughed, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. He looked at the woman who had crashed into his life and shattered his defenses, the warrior who had learned to heal, the princess who had learned to serve. He pulled her closer, burying his hand in her white hair, tilting her head back. "Didn't have to," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I just loved you, right?" Zirixa's breath hitched. The playfulness vanished, replaced by a look of utter adoration. She kissed him. It was a kiss that tasted of starlight and second chances. Under the light of the alien moons, surrounded by the singing jungle, they held each other, two broken souls who had changed the galaxy not by conquering it, but by conquering the fear within themselves. They had learned that true power wasn't about control. It was about the courage to trust, the strength to surrender, and the wisdom to love. And in that embrace, beneath the golden rings of Odera, the story of the soldier and the princess ended, and the story of Kai and Zirixa began.